did not cry when the envelope arrived. I did not call anyone. I just stood in my kitchen, still in my work clothes, reading the same paragraph 3 times until the words stopped looking like words. A court summons. My own parents had filed a motion to seize my savings account. I set it down on the counter next to my coffee mug. I went to bed. I lay there staring at the ceiling for 4 hours. And the whole time I was thinking, they have no idea what I've been building. Let me go back to the beginning because the beginning matters. My name is Lydia. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed CPA, and for the past 6 years I've worked as a forensic accountant at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. My job, in simple terms, is to find money that people have tried to hide. I trace transfers. I read contracts backwards. I find the thing nobody wanted found. The irony of that is not lost on me. I grew up in a house where money was always the subtext of everything. My parents weren't poor. My father ran a residential construction business. My mother managed the books for it out of the home office. We were comfortable. New cars every few years. Nice neighborhood. Yearly trips to Myrtle Beach. But there were 2 of us, me and my younger sister, Kendall. And if you'd spent 30 minutes in our house, you would have known immediately which one of us mattered more. Kendall was 6 years younger than me. She was the one who got the bedroom repainted twice because she didn't like the first color. She was the one whose dance competitions meant the whole family drove 4 hours on a Saturday. She was the one who got a car for her 16th birthday, a used Honda, sure, but still. When I turned 16, I got a card with $40 in it and a reminder that I'd need to start thinking about my future. I didn't blame Kendall for this. Not really. You can't blame a kid for being loved too much. I blamed the people who were supposed to love us equally and chose not to. I did what oldest daughters in my position tend to do. I got quiet. I got good at school. I made myself useful in ways that didn't ask for anything in return. I helped my mother with the books every summer from age 14 onward. Unpaid, of course. I learned QuickBooks. I learned how to read a balance sheet. I learned things about my father's business that, looking back, I probably shouldn't have been allowed to see. I got a full academic scholarship to UNC Charlotte. I remember telling my parents at dinner, and my mother said, "That's wonderful, honey," and then turned to ask Kendall if she'd heard back from her travel dance team yet. I left for college with 2 duffel bags and $1,100 I'd saved from babysitting and a part-time job at a grocery store deli counter. I did not ask them for a single dollar. For a while, I told myself we'd find our way back to something normal, that maybe once I was an adult, once I had my own life, we'd relate to each other differently. Instead, what happened was this. Kendall turned 22, maxed out 3 credit cards, and got engaged to a man who had never held a job for more than 8 months in a row, and my parents, rather than letting her navigate that on her own, turned to me. The first time they asked, it was framed as a loan. My father called on a Tuesday evening. I was eating leftover pasta at my desk. He said Kendall needed help with some debt consolidation. He said family takes care of family. He said he'd make sure it came back to me. I transferred $4,000 the next morning. I was 26. I had worked very hard for that money. It did not come back to me. The second time was 18 months later. Different reason, same pattern. A deposit on a wedding venue. Just a bridge, just temporary. My father's voice had a particular quality when he asked for money. Warm and firm at the same time, like he was doing me a favor by including me. $6,000. The third time, I said I needed to think about it. My mother called the following day. She said she was disappointed. She said she didn't know why I had to make everything so difficult. She said, and I want to be precise here because I have never forgotten this. She said, "Lydia, you've always had everything handed to you." I had a full scholarship. I had 2 duffel bags. I had $1,100 from slicing ham. I transferred the money. What I also did, starting that day, was open a document on my personal laptop and begin keeping records. Every transfer. Every date. Every phone call I could remember with approximate quotes. Every text message screenshot. I didn't know what I was building toward. I just knew that something in me had shifted, and I had learned enough in my career to understand that documentation is the difference between having a story and having a case. By the time I was 29, I had transferred a total of $41,000 to my family over 4 years. Not all at once. It came in pieces, the way these things always do, small enough each time that it felt almost manageable, large enough in aggregate to have been a down payment on something that was actually mine. I had also, quietly and without telling anyone, done something else. I need to explain this carefully because it matters. When I was 27, my parents took out a second mortgage on their home to fund an expansion of my father's construction business. The loan was through a local credit union. The business expansion, based on what I could see from the books I'd been helping with for years, was not well planned. The margins were thin. The timeline was optimistic. I knew with the particular certainty of someone who does this for a living that they were going to struggle. I was right. By the time I was 28, the business was carrying significant debt. Not catastrophic, but serious. A bad quarter away from serious problems. Here is what my parents did not know. That second mortgage note had been sold. This happens constantly in lending. Institutions sell loan portfolios to other investors. It had passed through 2 hands before landing with a small private investment group. I know this because I made it my business to know. I had a contact at the original credit union, and I spent 6 months following that paper trail in my spare time. And then I did something that I want to be very clear was completely legal. I made an offer to purchase the note. This is called note buying. It's not common knowledge, but it is a legitimate financial instrument. When you purchase a mortgage note, you become the lender. You don't own the house, but the borrower now owes their payments to you. I paid 83 cents on the dollar. I used money from a savings account I had opened at a bank my parents had never heard of, under a name my father would not have recognized. A single-member LLC I'd formed 2 years earlier for freelance consulting work. My parents' mortgage note now belonged, indirectly, to me. I did not tell them. I continued sending money when they asked, because I needed them to keep operating under the assumption that I was the same person I had always been. Compliant. Grateful for the opportunity to help. A little too busy with work to ask too many questions. I am not proud of every piece of this. I want to say that plainly. But I also want you to understand what it feels like to spend your entire life being extracted from and to finally decide, quietly, methodically, without drama, that you are going to stop it. The court summons came on a Thursday in October. Kendall's marriage had collapsed. This I already knew. Her husband had left in the spring. She was behind on rent, behind on her car payment, in significant credit card debt. None of this surprised me. What surprised me was what my parents had decided to do about it. They had hired a family law attorney and filed a motion arguing that the money I had transferred over the years constituted a family financial arrangement. Essentially, that I had been operating as an informal partner in a family financial unit, and that my savings should be considered a shared family asset available for redistribution to Kendall in her time of need. I want to let that sit for a moment. They filed it in Mecklenburg County. They had documentation, screenshots of the transfers I'd sent, records they'd apparently kept. Their attorney had written a brief that was actually quite clever, in the way that wrong things sometimes are. It leaned heavily on the voluntary nature of my contributions, the familial context, the idea that I had participated willingly in a pattern of mutual support. I read the entire filing the night I received it, then I read it again. Then I made a cup of tea and sat down at my desk and opened the document I had been building for 3 years. I was not panicking. I want to be honest about this. I was not panicking at all. I felt something closer to a door opening. I called an attorney the next morning. Not a family attorney, a civil litigation specialist named Mr. Thorne, who a colleague had recommended. He had a small office in South End, and he wore the same kind of reading glasses my grandfather used to wear, and when I laid out everything I had on his desk, he was quiet for a very long time. Then he looked at me over those glasses and said, "You've been preparing for this." I said, "I's been preparing for this." The formal meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday in November at Mr. Thorne's office. My parents' attorney had agreed to an out-of-court discussion before any further filings. Standard procedure in cases like this, an attempt to resolve without a full hearing. My parents arrived first. I saw them through the glass door as I came down the hallway. My father was in his good blazer. My mother had her hair done. Kendall was with them, which I had not expected. She was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, looking at her phone. I had dressed carefully that morning. Dark blazer, tailor trousers, my good leather portfolio. Not to impress them. They had never been impressed by me. To remind myself of what I was, I walked in. My father stood and gave me the kind of hug that is more of a performance than a greeting. My mother said it was so good to see me. Kendall said hi without looking up from her phone. I sat down across the table from their attorney, a woman named Ms. Carver, who had sharp eyes and a pleasantly neutral expression. Mr. Thorne sat beside me. Miss Carver opened by laying out their position again. The years of transfers, the family financial relationship, the hardship Kendall was now facing. She spoke in the tone of someone presenting reasonable terms. She said they weren't asking for everything, just enough for Kendall to stabilize. She said they hoped we could resolve this as a family. My father looked at me the way he always had when he was expecting me to say yes. It was not a cruel look. It was the look of a man who has never genuinely considered that the answer might be no. I let Mr. Thorne respond first, because that was what we had agreed to. He said our position was that the transfers were voluntary gifts with no legal obligation for continuation or recapture, that there was no written agreement establishing any family financial partnership, and that the motion had no legal merit. He was calm and precise and very good at his job. My father's expression shifted slightly. My mother's did not. Miss Carver said they were prepared to provide evidence of an ongoing pattern, that the regularity and scale of the transfers implied an arrangement. Mr. Thorne said, "We'd welcome the opportunity to examine that evidence. We have some documentation we'd like to share as well." I opened my portfolio. What I put on the table was organized into 3 sections. The first section was a complete record of every transfer I had made, the same records they had, plus my own copies, plus the text messages and calls where each transfer had been requested, including the messages where my mother told me I had always had everything handed to me in the same sentence she was asking me to hand over money, including the voicemail where my father had said the money was temporary and would be returned. 3 years of documentation, $41,000 in detail. Miss Carver looked at it carefully. Her expression did not change. The second section was a set of documents that I had prepared with Mr. Thorne. The transfers were not a financial partnership. They were gifts made under emotional pressure, some of them accompanied by explicit but unfulfilled promises of repayment. The legal framework around recapturing voluntary gifts is not favorable to the party trying to recapture them. Mr. Thorne had written a 7-page memo on this. It was very well sourced. My father started to say something. Mr. Thorne said politely, "Let's let Ms. Whitmore finish." The third section. I had debated with myself about this for a long time. It felt, in the wrong framing, like a threat. I had to keep reminding myself that it was simply a fact I was now making visible. I placed a single document on the table. It was a notice of assignment, the paperwork confirming that the note on my parents' second mortgage had been transferred to a new holding entity, completed 14 months prior. The holding entity was my LLC. Then I placed the LLC registration. Then I placed the registered agent filing, which included my name as the sole member. The room was extremely quiet. My father picked up the notice of assignment. He read it once. He read it again. He put it down. My mother looked at it over his shoulder. I watched her face do several things in quick succession. Then she looked at me. It was the first time in my adult life that I could not immediately read what she was thinking. Kendall had put down her phone. I said, "I'm not your lender yet, in any practical sense. The payments have continued through the servicer without interruption. Nobody owes me anything today that they didn't owe me last week." I kept my voice even. But I think it's relevant context for this conversation. Ms. Carver looked at Mr. Thorne. Then she looked back at the document. She was recalculating. I could see it. My father said, "Lydia, what is this?" I said, "It's exactly what it looks like." He said, "When did you? How did you?" I said, "I've been paying attention for a long time." There was a silence that lasted probably 15 seconds and felt much longer. My mother pressed her lips together. Kendall was looking at me like she wasn't sure she was seeing me correctly, like she'd expected someone else, and I'd shown up instead. Miss Carver asked for a brief recess. She went into the hallway with my parents and Kendall, and they were gone for about 20 minutes. Mr. Thorne poured himself a glass of water from the carafe on the table. He didn't say anything. He'd seen enough of these moments to know what silence was for. When they came back, my father's posture was different. The blazer looked like it fit differently. My mother sat down without saying anything. Miss Carver said that her clients were interested in exploring a resolution. Mr. Thorne said we were open to that. I said I had a proposal. The motion would be withdrawn, with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be refiled. In exchange, I would not call the note. I would not interfere with the existing payment structure. The mortgage would continue exactly as it had been, paid through the servicer until it was retired or the property was sold. They would never have to interact with me in my capacity as their lien holder. They would send me no more requests for money. We would have no further financial entanglement of any kind. I also said that if the motion was not withdrawn within 10 business days, I would be requesting a full accounting of the financial records from the business, records I had helped maintain, records that I knew, based on what I had seen, contained some irregularities that a forensic accountant might find interesting. I said this quietly, and I said it once, and I did not elaborate. Miss Carver wrote something on her notepad. She did not look up. My father said nothing. My mother said nothing. My mother said nothing. Kendall was looking at a point on the wall somewhere above my head. The motion was withdrawn 8 days later. I think people want to know if it felt the way they imagine it would. If there was a moment of triumph, if I left that room walking on air. The honest answer is that I left that room and sat in my car in the parking garage and ate the granola bar I'd had in my bag since that morning, because I hadn't been able to eat breakfast. It was cold. It was a little stale. I sat there for about 10 minutes just listening to the sound of cars going past on the street outside. What I felt was not exactly satisfaction. It was closer to the way you feel when you've been holding your breath for a very long time and you finally get to exhale. Not joy, just the absence of the thing that had been pressing on you. I have not spoken to my parents since that day in November. I have not spoken to Kendall. The payments on the note continue to arrive through the servicer, on time every month. There's a certain strange intimacy in that. The fact that we are still financially connected in this one small way, that I receive this one quiet signal every 30 days that they are still there, still paying what they owe to me, even though neither of us will ever say so out loud. My colleague asked me once, not long after everything was settled, whether I'd ever considered simply going to the authorities about the business irregularities, whether the leverage approach was the right one. I thought about it for a while. I told her that leverage guaranteed a specific outcome. Involving the authorities guarantees a process but not an outcome. And what I had needed my entire life, was not a process. It was a defined ending. What I built over those 3 years was not a trap. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't waiting to spring something on my family. I was protecting myself with the only tools I had. I am a forensic accountant. I find the hidden thing. I document. I build the case. That's what I did. The difference is that this time, the hidden thing was me. The version of me that had stopped agreeing to disappear. I'm telling this story because I've spent 31 years being the family member that everyone assumed would absorb whatever was needed, the one who didn't require anything back, the one who was quietly grateful for the privilege of being included. I am done being grateful for that. If you grew up in that house, or some version of that house, then you already know the particular loneliness of being useful to your family without being valued by them. You know what it costs to keep the peace. You know how long you can keep telling yourself it will be different, that the next time will be the last time, that people can change if the circumstances are right. I'm not telling you they can't. I'm telling you what I did instead. I paid attention. I kept records. I learned the rules of the game well enough to change what was at stake. And when they finally came for the thing I built, I was already 3 steps ahead of them. I've thought about this a lot since November. Not the meeting itself, I've replayed that enough times that the edges have worn smooth. I mean the longer arc of it. The years before the folder. The years I spent telling myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being good. It wasn't. There's a version of this story where I stay quiet, where I transfer the money one more time and then one more time after that, and I keep telling myself it's the last time while knowing it won't be. I know women who are living that version right now. I was living it for 4 years. And what I want to say, not as a lesson, because I'm not anyone's teacher, is just that the quiet version has a cost too. It just gets billed differently. It comes out of your self-respect in increments so small you don't notice until you're standing in your kitchen reading a court summons and the first thing you feel is in shock. It's recognition. That's the part that stayed with me. That I wasn't surprised. That somewhere in me I had known this was coming. And the reason I'd known is that I had watched my parents operate their whole lives by the principle that I would absorb whatever they needed me to absorb. They weren't cruel people in the conventional sense. They didn't think of themselves as taking anything. They thought of me as a resource, and resources don't have feelings about being used. That's what makes them resources. What changed wasn't them. People like that don't change. What changed was me deciding that understanding exactly how something works is not the same as accepting it. That's the piece about intelligence that nobody talks about. It isn't enough to be smart. Smart just means you can see the pattern clearly. What you do with that clarity is the actual question. For a long time, I used my clarity to make peace with things I shouldn't have made peace with. I understood why my parents were the way they were. I could trace it back through their own histories, their own unmet needs, the way people replicate what was done to them. Understanding it made me patient with it. Patient past the point where patience was a virtue and into the territory where it was just a habit of self-erasure. The note was not cruelty. I want to be clear about that even now. It was protection. Built quietly and legally over 18 months. The difference between having been wronged and being able to prove it. When you grow up being told you're making things up, being too sensitive, asking for too much, you learn to document. You learn to keep the receipts. Not out of bitterness, out of the hard-won knowledge that your word alone is never going to be enough for the people who built their comfort on not believing you. Kendall called once, about 3 months after. I didn't answer. I'm not sure what I would have said. I don't hate her. I don't think she's a bad person. I think she grew up knowing she was loved unconditionally, and that certainty made her careless in ways she probably doesn't even see yet. Maybe she'll figure it out. Maybe she won't. That's not mine to carry anymore. What I carried for 30 years was the belief that being indispensable to people who didn't value me was the closest thing to belonging I was going to get. And I'm telling you, from the other side of it, the granola bar in the parking garage, cold and a little stale, eaten alone in a car after the best thing I ever did for myself, that tasted better than any of it.